I would like to thank all the speakers and Anna for expertly moderating this panel. But now the moment we were all waiting for, the moment where money will start flowing and all the problems will be solved by just a lot of capital, or maybe not so. I think in this second session, we would like to approach some bio-innovation from the other side of the wallet, the investors' side. And for that, we have a nice panel from VCs from both Australia and Singapore. Before I introduce this panel, maybe I introduce myself. So I'm Kostas Vavitsas. I am the manager of SINERGY. SINERGY is the Synthetic Biology Consortium in Singapore. And we are funded by the government to promote collaborations and build an ecosystem. And please follow our social media and websites, both ours and Australia. I think you will see the links any moment in the chat, and there will be more events like this in the near future, both physical and online. But you're not here to see me and hear me. You're here to talk to the experts. And the expert of the day is the panel moderator. So David Coe is... he started his career as a process engineer, and then he left engineering and spent 20 years in the finance industry, creating companies and managing funds. And then recently, not so recently, 2013, he joined Intuitive, which is the tech transfer office of the Nanyang Technological University of Singapore. And now he's heading the whole department. So David, thank you so much for joining. And I will let you introduce our panel to the audience.
Thank you, Kostas. Thank you for the kind introduction. So can I have the rest of my panel members turn on their cameras? Yoksin, Phil, Alice, hi. Okay, so I think enough has been said about my background, and I'd like to quickly introduce our panel members today. We have Phil Morley from Main Sequence Ventures in Australia, early stage, one of the early stage largest deep tech investors, venture capital funds in Australia. We also have with us Yoksin, managing partner from iGlobe, which is also involved in deep tech investing globally. And then we have Alice Chen, who hails from the US and has recently moved to Singapore from Life Science Partners. And I'd like each of you, starting with Phil, maybe to introduce yourselves and give the audience a bit about your background. Phil?
Hi, David, and hello, everybody. Thank you for having me in this great session. Main Sequence is Australia's dedicated deep tech venture capital firm. We were founded in 2017 to be part of the solution to help more of the amazing R&D that happens here in Australia to capture its value and become globally significant companies. And a really important part of that has absolutely become synthetic biology. In fact, when I think about the work that I do, I find it hard to imagine investing in anything but synthetic biology for the next 10 years of my life, because this feels like an incredibly powerful platform upon which we're going to build some of the mega companies of the future. So within that, we're investing across the whole value chain. We're very, very comfortable and in fact excited about getting involved early on. We frequently actually found companies, that's how early we go, and then we invest all the way up to sort of Series C level. We can absolutely invest in Singapore companies as well as Australian companies, and it's a very exciting space, so I can't wait for this conversation to see what we can unlock together. Thanks, David.
Thanks. Alice, maybe you can go next.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here. So I am Alice Chen. I'm EVP with Accelerator Life Science Partners. We're a venture and development firm for early stage life sciences, and specifically in therapeutics. We have been in existence for about 20 years, starting in Seattle. in the US and now expanding to multiple sites, including Singapore as our latest site. What we do is that we invest in therapeutics development. Very similar to what Phil said, we invest early to a point where we created most of our portfolio companies. We're in Series A investment, and we take our portfolio companies to inflection point. Background-wise, I'm a chemical engineer by training, protein engineering, and prior to Accelerator, I was also at a biotech company, therapeutics development, and prior to that, I was at pharma company, Merck & Company. In terms of synthetic biology, obviously, as we in the biotech pharma industry start to develop new modalities, cell therapy, etc., synthetic biology is playing more and more role into these novel modalities and technology. So very interested and excited to talk about that during this session.
Thanks, Alice. Over to you, Yok-Tin.
Well, thanks for having me on this panel. I'm very glad to be here. Yeah, about iGlobe, we were set up in 1999 right, by the founder, Sue Boon, who actually started venture capital investing for the ST Group in Silicon Valley. So she had actually had her roots there, and basically we had, because of all that connections, we have actually started very much in the Valley, and went on to the East Coast, right, investing in there, as well as in Europe and now Asia. So our themes for investments are actually synthetic bio, being a primary one, where we actually invest in materials as well as cancer therapeutics, and also in deep tech and fintech. So you may say that it is a wide range, but actually we find applicability, right, in really the new game-changing disruptions, right, in terms of platforms that we see. And when we do our investment, it is really in the space of whether the company is a game changer, and and we're looking at that many times X, right, within the years of investment. So we very much welcome, right, startups from Southeast Asia at this time, and really in the space of fintech and in biotech as well. So background wise, I'm actually a organic chemist by training. That's why I did my PhD in NUS. After that, I actually switched altogether to tech. And my history goes with IBM, NCS, IHIS, having managed those operations, right, for system integration and healthcare. And I joined the firm, right, about 4 years ago. And really, I think this is the inflection point, right, for many materials, right, that are going to be replaced by very sustainable process of synthetic bio. And actually, I'm so glad that this is where I get to apply, both, the deep tech that I was involved with over the last 30 years, and actually chemistry and bio right now. So it's an exciting phase to be in. And glad to hear from all of you too.
Okay, thank you very much. So why don't we start off with the high-level overview of the sector? Synthetic biology is an emerging space. It intersects with material science, with chemistry, biology, and computer science, right? And within the synthetic biology space, we have things like alternative protein. We have things like engineering algae for carbon capture, or alternative food as well. And then we have therapeutics, and then we also have the marriage of biology and material science. So I'd like to, get the panelists' opinion on what do you see as an area of the biggest investment potential? Is it, are you seeing within Singapore and Australia bigger potential for therapeutics, bigger potential for alternative proteins in food, or carbon capture, or biomimicry materials? Maybe we can start off with Phil on that, since I think this is a much more mature space in Australia than it is in Singapore.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, at Main Sequence, we see synthetic biology as a modern production platform, a way that we can make things that we need in massive volumes on Earth, but do that in a sustainable way, unlike the traditional means of production. So, in particular, in our fund, we're very interested in new materials, new ways of making materials, and also new means of making food. If I think about food as an example, the way we articulate that is we think the problem that Earth has is that somehow we need to make twice as much food over the next few decades. And we've run out of planet Earth to actually do that with things like cows and chickens and things like that. And so we need that's why these modern production methods, they're not just vitally important, they're essential. We need it, otherwise we literally won't have enough food. And as an investor, I think that's an incredibly compelling thesis, because behind that are some of the biggest companies in the world that are about to emerge. I think the story I'm telling, certainly here in Australia, is that this is an incredible opportunity for new industries, plural, to rise out of Australia. There is no country in the world where this is currently, yet you would say, hey, that country is where it all happens. That's where this whole industry is rising. If anywhere, I must say it's Singapore. I've just spent quite a bit of time in the US and in Europe. If you ask most of these new innovative companies in the food space, for example, what's your go-to-market strategy? They'll say they're going to market in Singapore. And the reason they're saying they're going to market in Singapore is, in Singapore, there is a considerable effort to do the scale-up work, especially around precision fermentation. But most importantly, you have a very friendly regulator that is helping these things sort of come through very quickly. And it's very inspiring how the regulator and the innovators work so tightly together in Singapore. And this is really important for all of us. But I think what Australia has as a historically close partner with Singapore is we have great technology, we have great scientists in the community, we have all the scale-up stuff happening. I'm part of a very big project to get multi-million litre fermentation capacity on the ground here in Australia. And most importantly, we have the feedstock here. We have lots and lots of carbon that we can feed to our fermenters. And I'll just leave with the final point that we have an alternate dairy company called Eden Brew that makes dairy without cows. And the data that caused me to make that investment was I asked the scientists to calculate for me how much milk we could make with Australian feedstock. For example, sugar going into fermenters, making milk instead of Diet Coke or making red Coke. And the answer was we could double the world's milk supply out of Australia. And that is very, very exciting for me. I mean, if you want a signal for a new industry that no one's built yet, and we just need the country and the community to be brave enough to lean into it, that's the one for me, and that's why I'm so excited about the opportunity.
Thanks, Phil. How about you, Yok-Sin? What's been your view?
Yeah, I think when you ask about the impact that synthetic bio has, whereabouts is the greatest impact? Is it in healthcare, materials, food, etc.? I would say all of the above. It's a $3.2 trillion industry a year, right? And that is about to emerge. And in fact, when you look at the closest to our heart is actually healthcare. And in fact, cancer therapeutics is changing, and it was actually accelerated by COVID, right, with the mRNA production and all that. So I think the awareness is here, and the reception, right, to synthetic biomasses is already there. So I think we're in a very good spot for synthetic bio to really thrive. In my view, right, we had actually invested in synthetic bio companies like Twist and Ginkgo in the US, right, in the past, and we're currently invested in a materials company called Hue, which makes synthetic dyes, right, and it's going to be sustainable, and this is going to like define the future of colors, as the founders say. But really, I think when we look at what would we invest in synthetic bio, right, is the question. We would actually invest in the founders. I think, as we mentioned, right, with a $3.2 trillion potential, right, in the industry, there is a huge number of synthetic bio companies coming out of the various areas you mentioned, right? And really, the defining and the most, I guess, potential that we see would come from the right founders, right? The founders who are coachable, the founders who have got the right patterns, right? And the right attitude to actually pivoting. And the founders must actually have a very deep thought in terms of the applicability of their science, right? So that pivot can happen, right? As you know, I mean, demand will change, right, along the way. And how you pivot the company is very key, very key. So as investments, right, we definitely have a large portfolio in our synthetic bio theme. And definitely, I think we'll be putting more funds, right, into the sphere.
So, Alice, you moved from Seattle to Singapore, I think, in the beginning of this year,
Yes.
right? And you've been tech scouting and looking at the local ecosystem in Singapore. I'd love to get your opinion on the therapeutic space, healthcare. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think echoing the other panelists' point of view, this is a very vibrant space of science. And in terms of which industry to go into, I would say all of the above, whether it's food, material, fuel and energy, and obviously near and dear to my heart, diagnostics and therapeutics. And I would say that we actually do learn from each other a lot across different industries when it comes to bioprocessing, when it comes to better, faster, cheaper manufacturing, when it comes to coming up with new ways of engineering. So I would say, go into all of the above and solve all the problems, as many problems as we could, and then we will be able to leverage each other's experience. Specific to therapeutics, I would say that it's very exciting in Singapore and also across the globe, especially when it comes to gene therapy, cell therapy. So synthetic biology, by putting in synthetic gene circuits, we'll be able to control cell functions, cell localization, and other activities, both spatially and temporally. So we can make sure the cells are where they need to be and do what they need to do at the times when we need them to do it. And also the capability of doing a lot of sensory activities that other modalities might not be able to. So let the cells be able to feel the environment where they are in, whether it's a tumor microenvironment or a normal cell environment, so that they can adjust their functions accordingly. So those are some very exciting activities that we're seeing in the field. And I would say even more exciting is the possibility of making these novel modalities more accessible. By that I meant currently cell therapy, gene therapy, these are very high-tech technologies, and sometimes, especially cell therapy, personalized. And that would then intrinsically limit certain accessibility of the therapeutic. So can we leverage synthetic biology to make cell therapy, for instance, universal, so that we can make it a little bit more accessible to broader populations? So a lot of exciting possibilities. And in terms of Singapore, I think there's a great push in these novel modalities. So there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of eagerness from different components of Singapore to help us push these activities forward. And so very excited to be here, very excited to be in the field, and I can't wait to see what can come out in the next 5 years.
All right, thanks. So the next question deals with the investment process and how investors such as yourselves pick the companies to invest in. And I think Yoksin, you touched on this subject a little bit about investing in teams and founders and how that was an important criteria. Can I just get a view from Phil about how do you go about looking at some of these investments, and what kind of criteria and priority do you place on different aspects? Is it IP that's more important? Is it the team, the execution, strategy, business model? What is it?
I think we're going to keep saying all of the above to all your questions, David. But I think let me sort of try and walk through some of the things. It's table stakes. I think that there is some strong IP at the heart of something, because any of these companies is going to need to have a freedom to operate on the global stage that isn't going to be immediately attacked by some of the large number of competitors that are out there now. So I think we need to know what our strategy is for actually having this freedom to operate out in the market. But that, I would say, that's table stakes, right? Because there's lots of great science, there's lots of great scientists. We know how we're going to do a lot of these things. What I like to see is some thinking around the company and the market that this company is going to grow within. And this is really important, because the company needs to understand, at least as a hypothesis, how it's going to go to market, how it's going to scale. Because one thing's for sure, these companies aren't cheap. So from a capital strategy perspective, we can't grow a SynBio powered company in the same way we might have made a SaaS platform in eras of venture capital gone before, which means the strategy, I believe, needs to design into it how we sort of grow the value of these companies as fast as possible, not for greed reasons, but so that we can raise the large amounts of capital that we need to be successful when we need it, without diluting the founding team to become employees of their own company very, very quickly. And so we need to be very, very deliberate about doing that. And that's what leads us back to what is the market? What's the sort of packaging, if you like, around the science? What's the customer traction? In particular, at the moment, there's a very big conversation about what is the company's mechanism of scale, and we spoke about that a lot in the last panel with the startups. That the road to scale is the big problem, and I think as an investor, I want to hear an answer to that question, because there are a lot of let's say molecule companies in the world right now. I sort of did some recent analysis of this, and I think there are more than 200 companies on Earth right now who require mass scale bioproduction of their invention, and there is nowhere to make it at scale today. Now, I'll qualify that by saying that I don't expect the companies to have all the answers, because part of the answer is there isn't one, right? We need to invent it together. But it needs to be front of mind. There needs to be some thoughts on that and how the company is trying to get there, because without that, these molecule companies will be lemmings marching towards the edge of the cliff. So the summary of my answer to your question, David, is a quick hypothesis, at least, about what is the whole company that has the technology at the core, and how is it going to go to market, and what's its journey to scale over the first 5 years or so.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Alice, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer in two little parts. One is generally speaking, and the other part would be kind of therapeutics. What do we look for? So generally speaking, I would say it's it's a strong team solving an important problem and with unique solution that's protectable. So essentially, I think the strong team will already elaborate on that. And then the important problem will indicate that it's a market that would be feasible. And then it needs to be a unique solution, because if it's not differentiated with, then it would be challenging for any VCs to go in. And finally, it needs to be protectable, whether it's IP in the form of patent or know-how or trade secret, it needs to be protectable. Otherwise, again, it might not be a VC ready asset. When it comes to therapeutics, I would say there are a few key areas. So the solution needs to be novel with differentiation that can translate to competitive advantage against the existing approaches, if there are existing approaches. And then for therapeutics, because it's related to biology and complex in nature, we need to be able to understand the mechanism of the biology and the disease state and the mechanism of the proposed therapeutic approach, and obviously supported by robust data set. And then to, I believe, Phil's point, we'll need to be able to define a feasible development path. And in the therapeutics space, obviously, timeline milestones, regulatory activities, manufacturing capabilities going forward, IP strategies, and just general competitive landscape. Those would be the areas that we definitely would look into.
So Xin, you mentioned a bit about team earlier. Is there anything else you'd like to supplement on that?
Right. I think for the team, before the team comes, right, is actually the IP, right, patents, and whether, you know, the patent is, as Phil and Alice has mentioned, right, whether it is in place and protectable, right, and I mean that's key. First of all is actually the IP. The second thing that we will look for really is the scalability, as Phil mentioned, right, and in that we will look for whether, you know, there is a platform. Right, platform meaning that beyond that particular one molecule, can we have a family of molecules, right? Or beyond that oncolytic virus, can we have a family of that, right? That would address more types of diseases. And the same thing with with diagnostics as well, right? Whether you can scale that to do other markers. So that's the two key things. I think the most important is actually the founders, right? Which is your question. Regarding the founders, we found that actually it is important that, you know, the founders are affiliated to the IP that was generated. Either they produced it or they are, they're affiliated with it in a strong way, because I think that is what is going to drive the company. And having that close relationship is very important, because, you know, the last thing you want is some arguments that happen, right? And then separation happens, and there goes, because synthetic bio companies are very much patent protected, right? And once you have the patent, right, in terms of even the cancer therapeutics, you're kind of like protected for a good 20 years or so, right? And so that becomes very key. Unlike tech companies, right, where affiliation to standards and that sort of thing is more important. So for synthetic bio, right, a close look at the IP and patent is very much needed. And the founders, right, must be, I think we tend to go for really scientist founders, right, at least in the team, right? They could have a team of maybe a business person and a scientist, but definitely the scientist has to be part of the founding team, right? Because he's going to drive, I mean, the whole science, and he or she understands it the best and will be able to pivot. Right, and if it is a platform-based company, then the ability to pivot is better, right? So those are the things that we go for. Doesn't mean that the founder needs to have a whole lot of previous entrepreneurship experience, but I mean that definitely helps. But that is not the only criteria. I think more important is the founder needs to know the science pretty, you know, in and out. Very passionate about it, is able to protect it, and you know, really, you know, invest his whole life into that company. So that's the sort of founders that we're looking for, really passionate about the business.
Okay, so I'd like to, one question I'd like to pose is, coming from a TTO office, what do you do about, in our experience, commercializing IP coming out from the university? Most of the time, there are inventions looking for a problem to solve, and in some cases, or in a large number of cases, we've also seen good technologies with bad business models or non-existent business models. So sometimes, what do you do about scientists or researchers who come out and are unwilling or don't have the willingness to pivot into a business where the correct application of the technology is there and a far bigger market is there for the VC to fund, rather than here's good science, but there's no business with the science, and the scientist doesn't want to pivot. How do you resolve these issues? Because it is a common problem we find in the ecosystem. So can I have maybe Alice start off with that, address that question?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the step one that I would take is actually to understand the resistance of going into different applications, especially in the field of therapeutics. There are probably reasons behind it, whether it's because the biology doesn't work out, etc. But if there isn't a scientific, technical reason to not go into it, I would say we will try to express our opinions and the rationales behind it. There are times where we have to convince scientific co-founders whether the path that they're trying to take, development path that they're trying to take, may or may not be commercially viable. But usually we can come to some kind of a mutual agreement. Then again, because we're in therapeutics, a lot of times when the founders have a technology, it's already somewhat directed. So there is a starting point. It's not a blank platform where you can go into 100 different directions. So I would say we probably have a little bit of an easier time relative to some of the broader technology platforms.
Yeah. Phil, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for us, it's about, even when we have some existing technology, kind of zoom out and think, well, what is the company? What is a company that might have this technology trying to do? What problem is it trying to solve? Who are this company's customers? And I'll give you an example. We're looking at some technology at the moment which reduces the need for sugar in a certain kind of food, and it's coming out of a research organization. But we don't want to start a company that only does that. I mean, it's actually quite exciting, and has a huge opportunity in its own right. Is it big enough for venture capital? Maybe not. That's our sort of framing question, and we're trying to sort of rethink of it as a company that's going to reduce sugar in food in general. For the world's diet, especially as when we're living in a time when that's actually going the other way and we're eating more and more sugar. And so it gets quite interesting when you're talking with the TTO about that, because it becomes, well, that's quite interesting, but we don't want to just do a tech transfer deal for that IP. We want to actually have a relationship with you and perhaps also with other research organizations, so that a platform, to use Yoke-Sin's sort of thinking, actually starts to develop that comes in to the company, and the company can sort of solve the problem for real customers on a bigger scale. Now, the other thing that you mentioned is the people. I mean, I also agree with Yoke-Sin's other point earlier that we need inside the company the person that we call it carrying the flame of the IP. You know, they're nurturing it and they're developing it, and if it changes, they can adapt, because it's part of them. That's the ideal. That's the ideal model. When we started Main Sequence, I think we had a much stronger line on what it means for a science-driven startup, which was effectively, you need to spin out, you need to sort of hitch your wagon to the company, and that's where you need to go. And I think we're more relaxed about that now. We've observed that not all scientists want to do that. A lot of scientists are in a much more fertile environment if they can reach into all sorts of different areas and bring things in, and that means they're better inside the research organization. Frequently now we're starting companies which have a science co-founder and a strong relationship with a university, for example, which is ongoing. Because I think the other principle, which I think is important, is usually at the point that there's a tech transfer moment. And this is a conversation I find myself having with tech transfer offices a lot. It's the beginning, not the end of the commercialization process. And quite often these things are structured like, everything's done, sign this, let's, and then just go ahead and sell it. And actually, it's wow, we've got a lot to do right now. So it's kind of how do we sort of set the platform ready for everything that has to happen over the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yoxin?
Yeah, I think thanks, Phil, for those points. I think I absolutely agree, right, with all that's said. But I would like to share perhaps, what's happening in the US and what's happening in Singapore. Just by, sharing an experience, right? We invested in Hue, for example, that came out of the UC Berkeley lab. And it's basically Jennifer Doudna's team of people, right, in CRISPR. And we found that actually, the whole ecosystem out there actually has got an incubator service there that trains, the scientists to actually manage business. So they're given like 101, finance, how to do a cap table and, how to get investors. But more important than that is the fact that if you've got this indie bio, right, basically is like a VC, very early stage VC that actually does the investment, and they actually do not only incubation, right, but they will actually look for the ecosystem of funders, of VCs. Right, and beyond that, right, so that's how we were found, right, and actually we sort of invested with them, and they continue to actually follow the companies, right, if the companies are actually of potential. So we see this nurturing hand, and because of that, we nurture the company as well by looking for markets for them, right. So I think that's very key, and in Singapore, I'm glad that we have that too in A-Star. Right, and A-Star actually does that, by nurturing the companies, looking for the investors for them, and taking a portfolio kind of approach for these companies, so that they can actually lend VCs investments and stage these funding very well and in a more organized manner, so it does not impinge on the founders, right, to have to grapple with these situations, which can be quite unsettling. Right, and take a lot of time away from the actual science and the commercialization efforts. So I think having this early stage hand-holding is very key, right? And I think that actually also takes the risk out of the VCs, because as VCs, right, we want to, as the statistics show, right, the many of them that can't make it, right. Because I mean, this is really biology, right? It's unlike chemistry, where it is very deterministic, right? So this may well or may not work. And indeed, in the company that we invested in, right, there are many situations along the way, right? I mean, if they didn't have the deep expertise, they would have given up. But no, right? They plod on and found resources to solve many of the chemistry and biological problems along the way, right? And now we are going into commercialization. So I think having the early early angels and investors coming out of the universities in the TTO actually helps us to actually put in the investment when the company is somewhat along the way and has proven, right, the first stage, of the POCs, for example, right, and we're in a more comfortable position to actually invest in them. So I think having that TTO is absolutely important. And as you rightly pointed out, right, the TTO must be actually linked to the industry, to the VC funding industry, and so on. In fact, one of the lessons I learned was that even when these companies came out of the university, right, the incubators were actually looking for to stage the next stage of funding. So even as we invested, right, we also was looking at the next stage and so on. So that actually keeps the company going, and it's very important for companies such as these, which actually rely on science. And then relying on science is very different from relying on tech, because tech is more predictable and more controllable, but science is you have to rely on nature. So
yeah, so I mean, based on where I'm sitting in the TTO office, what we've analyzed on our spin-off companies is that for non-life science therapeutics type companies or medical device companies, those in robotics, material science, and all that stuff, 9 out of 10 cases of failure or inability to raise capital relate to not having a business model or having a very weak or bad business model. Life sciences, ironically, is driven by data. So it's much more, as Alice would say, deterministic, because if you find, a specific molecule or a disease pathway, and you can find particular chemistry or compound that binds together with that particular mechanism of disease to stop that disease from happening. And if you have sufficient data in animal and human data to prove that, then you don't worry so much about the business model as you would about the science. But if you're talking about synthetic biology, let's say, to use, as Phil had discussed, engineering food with less sugar content in them, the scientists may start out with a hypothesis about a certain industry or application for this science, but when it goes into business, what we found is that for non-therapeutic type of startups, they fail on account of having to pivot into a proper business model. So we, in NTU, what we've tried to do to mitigate these issues is that we have added a venture build team to help our both types of companies to craft out their business models, to ideate a bit better, so that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create companies that what I call are investable startups, and not just a startup for the sake of creating a startup. So I'm a bit conscious about time. I just want to ask you one more question before we go into the Q&A session. The 2 questions up there that have been posted. But what are some of the common mistakes you have seen startups do, and what advice would you give to prospective founders? Maybe Alice, can you kick off with that? Common mistakes and advice?
Sure. I would say a lot of what we do depends on balance. So common mistakes would actually be on both polarities. So for instance, so instead of that, maybe another way to answer is what works well in our experience, and by that you'll know what I meant. So I would say number 1 is actually what we talked about quite a bit a little earlier, which is it would be good to commit to the technology. So understand and commit to the technology. At the same time, keep an open mind on where it can be going. And by that I meant we have seen mistakes on both ends, where the team is too committed to what they're thinking the technology is going, and they're unwilling to explore other possibilities that might be more strategically interesting. And we have also seen companies, also a mistake by overreaching beyond their capability and spread their activities too much. So together, I think the balance, it's a bit of a Goldilocks, where the best part would be is to be committed to your core technology, understand your core technology, and understand the essence and the competitive advantage of your core technology. At the same time, be open-minded on where it can be going. Other things, just be communicative, be productively communicative, and ready to find solutions together. Because we have seen maybe a lot of times startups are difficult, regardless of which field it's going. And it actually takes a lot of people from different functions to make it work. So being able to communicate and being able to have the open mind to find solutions together is very important. And also another thing that has worked out well for groups is to have a good group of advisors, whether it's colleagues or mentors, for different functions, so that you have that kind of resources to bounce ideas for that. And the one thing that we hear a lot about, especially first-time startup colleagues, is that it's a lot harder than they thought. Right? It's a lot harder than they thought when they started it. It takes longer. It's a lot of troubleshooting. Things don't usually go right. In fact, things usually don't go right. So it's a lot of troubleshooting. Things are expensive. So the best way is for startup teams to adjust the expectation accordingly, so that they come in knowing that things will go wrong. There will be a lot of problems to solve, and that they are open to solving it with a group of people. I would say those are some of the things that I would highly recommend any startup colleagues to consider.
Okay. Yoksin, just a quick one. We have 3 questions now, so if we can get 3 quick answers and then go on to the Q&A.
Right. Okay. Just a quick one would be that I think just be yourself and then just show what you have, because we know that we are investing in something which is work in progress, right? For startups, just show what you have and know your stuff well enough, right? To actually show the advantage and show why it is a game changer.
Phil?
I think the biggest mistake I see is people being too secretive and staying in the lab privately for too long. And this is exactly where companies end up 3 years into their life and tens of millions of dollars down the toilet before they finally speak to a customer and realize that they're building the wrong thing. It's especially hard because we've just been talking a lot about IP and things like that. So there's this tendency to keep everything closely held, but that prevents us from understanding precisely what our focus should be and how we actually get to that traction point in the earliest possible timescale.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to move on to the questions now posted online. The first question was posted early on, says that I understand that IP is important, but what about those who have exciting new systems like gene circuits, which are not protected by IP, but have many exciting applications with expertise to then take it to product? So I think this is a question of know-how versus patent protection. Any of you have any opinions on this question? Maybe Alice or?
I think Phil unmuted. Phil, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can have a quick crack. I mean, for me, the IP does not need to exist before I invest. So a patent doesn't need to exist before I invest, but yeah, there needs to be a kind of, a vector that's happening, and then there needs to be a strategy to be collecting and protecting the IP, however it manifests, whether it's trade secrets or whether it's patents that actually accrue over time. So we're very focused on what the IP strategy is rather than what the piece of paper is. And absolutely, when we're looking at food as a let's say quite an opposite to therapeutics as a sort of IP universe, quite often food companies don't want to patent something because they don't want to disclose what it is so that other people go ahead and copy it. So it can be just as valuable to have a know-how strategy.
Yoxin?
Yeah, I think like Phil, when I mentioned about IP, of course, that is actually desired, right? But if you have a strategy for that, and many of them will tell us that, okay, it's in progress, right, in terms of getting accepted, or there's an IP strategy around it, we'll be happy to see it. As I said, just show us what you have and let us, work together to see how we could actually advance, the business model.
And Alice, any quick thoughts?
Yeah, ditto. I would say strategy. Okay. Yep, having a strategy.
Okay. Okay, then there's a question about what can we learn from early SynBio companies like Amyrisys and Zymergen, and it seems like one of them pivoted and Zymergen didn't pivot. So they got eventually acquired by Ginkgo, blah blah blah. So, any of you have any opinion on that? Alice, since you're more familiar with the US markets?
I don't have anything specific to learn from it, but I would say that this is one of those examples where we need to look at. But
I don't think that the panel here
from the Ginkgo perspective.
Since we are investors of Ginkgo. Right, so Ginkgo had a platform, right? Just now I mentioned about platforms. So we invested in Twist and Ginkgo, who have platforms. Twist is DNA, and this Ginkgo is like, it's a tool, it basically. And with that, it's quite easy for it to acquire. But I mean, Zymergen is a very respectable company, right? And as we say, this is the ways of the market, right? It got, so that one is actually is another huge discussion.
Okay. So next question here. We have about 6 more minutes left on the hour. What are the challenges for SynBio ecosystems in Australia and Singapore vis-a-vis the ones that we see in the US and UK or Europe? Do you see any marked differences, Yoxin?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities, but of course the question is of scale, right? In the US, they've actually been there for yonks, and then we are we actually have in Singapore, right? There's quite a mature biomedical industry, right? And we're riding on that now to actually pivot to synthetic bio and all the new therapeutics and cancer therapeutics and diagnostics. So I think in terms of ecosystem, yes, I would gladly, or I would wish for a more global handshaking system across the world, because I think we need to actually leverage on one another's progress, right? As what Alice mentioned, right? What goes on in one place, right, is going to be applicable in another. But we have this whole concept of patent protection, etc., right? But I think we all can go further if we went together, literally in this field, and we have to find a way to actually work together, right? Rather than go in isolation, because I mean it is a huge industry about to replace almost everything that we know today.
Yeah,
Alice,
Alan, I would say the one of the biggest challenges that our geography faces relative to USA and EU is probably talent, the pool of talent, and that relates to the scale that's associated with the geography. So yeah, we are solving that problem. We're trying to solve that problem, but that's likely the largest challenge.
Yeah, I kind of agree. But Phil, I guess that wouldn't be as applicable. You have a lesser challenge in that?
Well, I think there is definitely scarcity in all things in SynBio. Thankfully, it's sort of reasonably spread across the world, but actually it's getting very competitive. So our SynBio companies, the most junior member on the team might get headhunted twice a week at the moment. I mean, so our big fear in Australia is that there's a big vacuum sucking everyone out into Silicon Valley that we'd like to avoid. But I think that where I began today, I think is important for us to recognize that there is no country in the world where SynBio is a dominating platform of production, where they've nailed it, where there's mass scale production, and that's our opportunity. I think Asia Pacific can be the world leader on that if we step into it. And there are many things happening in terms of the community coming together, in terms of people radically collaborating, that would indicate that we have a shot at the title there in a way that is just all too confusing in the United States and other parts of the world. So that's my mission. Let's work together and be a player.
Okay, cool. Okay, the next question is for Yok-Sin. Yok-Sin mentioned that having investors is beneficial in the early stages, but they seem to have been advised, this startup seems to have been advised to avoid VCs in the early stage. I don't know why. Could you elaborate on whether it would be advisable to get a VC in as early as possible, or rely on angel funders and hodgepodge investors? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think my answer to that is to get a VC that understands your science. I mean, that's better. I mean, to me, right? Well, you can have an angel, right, who just believes in you, but don't really know. But actually, if you have a VC early, that VC can prepare, right, the subsequent stages for you, as well as bringing the ecosystem. And as you mentioned correctly, work on the business model and get that right from the start.
So, what about you, Alice? Are you seeing startups, shy away from you guys and say, "Oh, we want to go for angels and high net worth investors and family offices," or, we bring it on, we want the VCs?
Yeah, so we don't really see that very often, but then again, we probably don't see that population in general. So I would say my recommendation to founders who are thinking about creating companies is to talk to as many people as possible. And that would be people who are trying to do what you're trying to do, who have done it, and also as many VCs, angels, etc. All the communities that's involved, potential stakeholders. Because by talking to them, you will understand what each firm would offer. Not all VCs are created equal, and we all offer different things and have different strengths. So I would recommend folks who are thinking about a new venture to talk to as many people as possible. And even more important than that, and probably before you even talk to anyone, to understand your own business. Again, understand your own strength, where the technology should be going, what is missing, so that when you talk to as many people as possible, you will be able to evaluate who would be the best partner in this venture. So yeah, talk to as many people as possible.
Okay.
See the value add.
Thanks for that, Alice. So I think with that, we've kind of run out of time on the hour, and I'd like to hand it over to Robert, who will close with some wrapping remarks, and then hand it to Costas as well. Robert, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. What an amazing session, or two sessions that was over the 2 hours. And thank you to everybody who's able to stick around to the end. I hope you got a lot out of it. There's some real key themes came out there around scaling, but I think even more so around people, whether that's skills or that's values and what they can
so
do.
Fast that next year we'll have a very different session about things that have happened.
Yeah, so it's been an amazing session. So just on behalf of Synthetic Biology Australasia, I just really want to thank the two moderators, David and Anna, for their preparation and all the work. I'd love to thank also the panelists from both sessions, the founders and the investors. There were some amazing insights, some things that you just can't get from reading about. You've got to hear from the horse's mouth. So this was really also a landmark event. This is the first time that SBA has done an international event, and it's great to be partnering with SINERGY, and I hope to make some really positive steps towards joining up our communities, both our members and the companies and the investors and so on. And I think working together, we can really deliver on synthetic biology. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Kostas for the final words.
Again, I would like to thank everyone for coming over, for you, for participants who stayed, and David and Anna for moderating the sessions, and of course the panelists that gave their amazing insights. We will do our best to release some of the material today in a more video format, so we can go back and draw in key messages. And as Robert said, it's the first event we did with the Biology Australasia. Close to my heart, as I was a board member of SBA a few years back, and it will be more in the future, so please follow us in social media. So have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye.